The night the words were spoken, they did not sound cruel at first. They sounded tired, like a truth said too many times to be softened anymore. "No one is going to come for you," the voice said, low and steady, carrying the weight of 100 empty miles. The oil lamp on the table flickered, throwing nervous light across the rough wooden walls. And for a moment, the room seemed to shrink, as if the dark itself had leaned in to listen. Outside, the wind dragged dust across the plain, whispering against the porch boards like a warning that had arrived too late. The house stood alone, where the road gave up. It was the kind of place people once built with hope and stubborn faith, believing the land would answer them kindly if they worked hard enough. Time had proven otherwise. The paint had peeled, the fence had leaned, and the fields beyond lay tired and pale under the moon. Still, the house breathed with memory. Every plank had heard laughter once. Every window had watched someone wait for a return that never came. Inside, Elias Crow sat stiff in a chair that had known better days. His hands rested on his knees, large and scarred, hands shaped by labor and regret. He had the look of a man carved from the same wood as the land itself, dry, weathered, and unyielding. Years ago, folks along the river towns spoke his name with a mix of respect and caution. Elias Crow did not bend easily, and he did not forget. Tonight, though, his eyes betrayed him. They were fixed on the doorway, wide, not with fear, but with the sharp attention of a man who knows the past has finally caught up. Across from him stood Mercy Hale, her posture straight, her shadow long on the wall behind her. Mercy carried herself like someone who had learned early that softness was a luxury. Her coat was pulled tight, not just against the cold, but against the world. She had ridden hard to get here, her boots still marked with the road, her breath still carrying the dust of distance. When she spoke again, her voice did not rise. It did not need to. "This place is forgotten," she said. "The maps barely remember it. The law surely does not. Whatever you are waiting for, it is not coming." Elias did not answer right away. He listened to the wind, to the creak of the house settling, to the faint ticking of the clock that had outlived its maker. He had waited most of his life, though he would never admit it. He had waited for rain when the sky stayed clear. He had waited for justice when silence answered instead. He had waited for footsteps on this porch that never came. Waiting had become a habit, almost a belief. "You came," he finally said. Mercy's mouth tightened. "I am not who you are thinking of." "No," Elias replied. "But you came all the same." The lamp hissed softly, and that was when the light shifted. It was subtle, the kind of change a man might miss if he were not already on edge. The glow near the doorway dimmed, then stretched, pulled into a longer shape that did not belong to any object in the room. Mercy felt it before she saw it. The hair along her arms lifted. The air grew heavier, as if the night had stepped inside without asking permission. A shadow appeared in the doorway. It did not rush in. It did not speak. It simply stood there, tall and still, cutting off the pale moonlight behind it. The shape was human, yet wrong in a way that made the chest tighten. Elias rose slowly, the chair scraping against the floor. His heartbeat sounded loud in his ears, a drum calling up old memories he had buried deep. "So," he said quietly, "you found me after all." The shadow did not answer. It did not need to. Its silence spoke of long rides under open sky, of promises broken on lonely roads, of debts that age could not erase. Mercy turned slightly, her hand hovering near her side, though there was nothing there to reach for anymore. She had given up weapons long ago, or so she told herself. Tonight that choice felt suddenly foolish. This was not the first time the past had come knocking at Elias Crow's door. Years earlier, when the town of Red Hollow still had a schoolhouse and a bell, he had stood in another doorway, younger and angrier, with a different kind of shadow before him. That night had ended with blood on the dust and a truth no one wanted to speak. The town had moved on. Elias had not. He took this land instead, this empty stretch where memories echoed louder than voices. Mercy knew parts of that story. Everyone who traveled these roads did. He spoke of it in half-sentences and lowered voices, careful not to give it shape. The old American frontier had been built on such stories, on men who did what needed doing and paid for it in quiet ways. Mercy had made it her business to learn which stories still had teeth. "Should not be here," she said to the shadow, forcing calm into her words. The shape shifted slightly, enough for the lamplight to catch the edge of a coat, the brim of a hat. A face remained hidden. The presence filled the doorway, blocking the exit, blocking the idea of escape. Outside, a horse snorted softly, unseen but close, a reminder that someone had arrived with purpose. Elias stepped forward, placing himself between Mercy and the doorway. It was an old instinct, one he did not question. "This ends tonight," he said, though he was not sure what end he meant. The shadow tilted its head as if considering him, measuring the years written into his frame. Still, it did not speak. Silence stretched, thick and dangerous. Mercy felt her pulse in her throat. She had come to warn Elias, to pull him away from a fate she believed was already set. Instead, she had walked him straight into it. The clock on the wall struck once, marking an hour no one would remember kindly. The sound seemed to break something. The shadow took a single step forward, crossing the threshold, and the room felt suddenly smaller, tighter, like a trap sprung slow on purpose. Mercy's mind raced. Old American justice was rarely clean. It arrived wearing familiar faces and left carrying ghosts. She had sworn she would not be part of another ending like that, yet here she stood, caught between a man who refused to run and a past that refused to stay buried.
"Elias,"
she said, her voice softer now. "Listen to me." He did not turn. His eyes were locked on the figure before him. "No one is going to come for me," he said, repeating her words, tasting them like a challenge. I never believed they would. The shadow stopped just inside the room. The lamp flame bent toward it, trembling. Outside, the wind fell quiet, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Whatever was about to happen had been waiting a long time. And as Mercy realized how small their choices had become, she understood that some doors, once opened, never truly close. The shadow remained just inside the doorway, as if the line between outside and inside still mattered. The door creaked once in the night wind, then settled. Elias Crow did not move back. He stood firm, shoulders squared, the way he once had when the world made more sense, and right and wrong still seemed to follow rules. Mercy Hale watched the two shapes facing each other and felt the weight of years pressing down on that small room. The man in the doorway finally lifted his head enough for the lamplight to touch his face. It revealed hard angles and eyes that did not blink easily. His beard was trimmed short, silver threaded through black, and his coat bore the marks of long travel. This was a man who lived on roads and carried his history with him, stitched into his clothes and carved into his bones. "Elias Crow," the man said at last. His voice was calm, almost polite, which made it worse. "You look older than I expected." Elias let out a slow breath. "And you look just as patient as ever, Gideon Ash." Mercy stiffened at the name. Gideon Ash was not a story told lightly. He was the kind of man legends grew around, not because people admired him, but because they feared what followed in his wake. Where Gideon Ash passed, things changed. Towns emptied. Promises broke. Silence spread. Gideon stepped another pace into the room. The door closed behind him with a soft but final sound. "Patience keeps a man alive," he said. "So does memory." Elias nodded once. "Then you remember Red Hollow." Gideon's eyes flicked briefly, toward Mercy, then back to Elias. "I remember everything." The lamp hummed quietly. Mercy felt the tension tighten like a rope pulled too far. Red Hollow was more than a town name. It was a scar on the land. Years ago, it had been a stop for wagons and railmen, a place of dust and hope and trouble in equal measure. Then one night, something had gone wrong. The official records were thin. Fires, missing men, stories that did not agree with each other. After that, Red Hollow faded until it existed only in whispers. "You should not have come alone," Elias said. Gideon gave a faint smile. "I never come alone, simply arrive first." That was when Mercy understood why the horse outside had sounded so restless. Gideon Ash did nothing without planning 3 steps ahead. If he was here, others were close enough to matter. Not in the house, not yet, but near. Mercy stepped forward, despite the warning bell ringing in her chest. "This land is quiet now," she said. "Whatever you are chasing ended a long time ago." Gideon turned to her fully for the first time. His gaze was sharp, assessing the way a man looks at a locked door to decide whether it is worth breaking. "Quiet land hides the loudest truths," he replied. "And you are?" "Mercy Hale?" The name gave him pause. Just a flicker, but Mercy saw it. She had earned that reaction the hard way.
You were not part of Red Hollow, Gideon said. No, she answered.
But I buried some of what came out of it. Elias glanced back at her, then surprised. Mercy had never spoken of that time in plain words. She had ridden with men who cleaned up what others left behind, who made sure the dead stayed dead and the living stayed silent. It was not justice, it was survival. Gideon considered her, then nodded slightly. Then you understand why I am here. Elias's jaw tightened. You are here because you could not let it go. I am here, Gideon said evenly, because men died without answers. Men chose their path, Elias shot back, and they paid for it. Silence fell again, heavy as a held breath. Mercy could feel the old American code pressing against modern caution. This was how things had always gone, not with shouting, not with sudden violence, but with words laid down like markers on a trail that only ended one way. Gideon moved toward the table, resting one hand on its edge. His fingers were steady. You left Red Hollow before the smoke cleared. You took this land, you disappeared. I waited. Elias laughed once without humor. You waited for what? An apology for the truth, Gideon said. For the moment you would stop running? I was never running, Elias replied. I was done. Mercy watched Elias closely. Beneath his stubborn calm, something else stirred. Guilt, maybe, or fear, shaped like resolve. He had lived all these years with the belief that the past would stay where he left it. Tonight proved him wrong. Outside, a distant sound drifted across the fields, a low murmur, voices carried by the wind. Mercy's spine stiffened. Gideon had not come alone, not truly. Others were nearby, waiting for a signal or an excuse. You do not want this to end here, Mercy said quietly. Gideon turned to her again. Endings choose their place. Elias stepped closer to him, close enough that Mercy feared a spark might set everything alight. If you are looking for confession, Elias said, you will not get it. I am not looking for words, Gideon replied. I am looking for balance. The word hung in the air, dangerous in its simplicity. Balance had been the excuse for many wrongs dressed up as right. Mercy had seen men kill in its name, had watched families broken so the scales could feel even. Her thoughts drifted back to the road that brought her here. She had heard rumors weeks ago, pieces of Gideon Ash moving again, asking questions that should have stayed buried. She had ridden hard to reach Elias, hoping to pull him away before the shadow crossed his door. She was too late.
Oh.
The clock ticked on, marking seconds that felt stolen. Gideon's gaze returned to Elias, steady and unyielding. You can still come with me, he said. We can speak where others can hear. Elias shook his head. I have spoken enough in my life. Mercy felt the room tilt toward something inevitable. She knew this story. It did not rush. It waited until all exits felt closed, until every choice seemed wrong. Outside, the voices grew a little clearer, boots shifting, men settling into positions they thought unseen. Gideon straightened, adjusting his coat. Then we will stay a while, he said. I have waited years. I can wait a little longer. Elias met his gaze without flinching. So can I. Mercy looked from one to the other, understanding settling in her bones. This was not a confrontation meant to end quickly. It was a slow tightening of fate, a reckoning, shaped by old roads and older promises. The night pressed against the windows, and somewhere beyond the fields, the past gathered its strength. Ready to step fully into the light, the night stretched thin, as if it were listening to them. Gideon Ash took a seat at the table without asking, resting his hat beside the lamp. The simple act felt like a claim. Elias Crow did not sit. He remained standing, a quiet wall of resistance, while Mercy Hale stayed near the window, watching the dark four movement that refused to show itself. You always like to stand your ground, Gideon said, his tone almost reflective. Even when the ground was burning, Elias's eyes narrowed. And you always like to call it balance. Mercy shifted her weight. The words circled something old and dangerous. Balance had been the reason Red Hollow bled. Balance had been the excuse whispered after the smoke rose and the bodies were counted without names. Gideon leaned back slightly. You think I enjoyed that night? You think I wanted it to go the way it did? I think, Elias replied. You did not stop it when you could have. That struck deeper than shouting would have. Gideon's jaw tightened. Men made choices. You more than most. Mercy turned from the window. Choices are rarely clean in places like that, she said. The ones left behind pay the longest. Gideon's gaze lingered on her. You speak like someone who stayed. I stayed long enough, Mercy answered. Long enough to see what silence costs. Outside, a shadow passed between the fence posts. Mercy caught it in the corner of her eye. Someone moved closer, careful but not hiding as well as they believed. Dean Ash's people were patient, but patience always frayed at the edges. Elias crossed his arms. If you are here to drag me back to a place that no longer exists, you wasted your ride. Gideon picked up his hat, turning it slowly in his hands. Red Hollow exists as long as men remember it, he said. Men do remember, especially the ones who lost something there. Mercy felt the pull of another memory. One she rarely allowed herself. The night after Red Hollow burned, she had helped a woman named Ruth Calder bury her husband near the river. No marker, no prayer loud enough to travel. Ruth Calder had not cried. She had simply stared at the water until morning came, then walked east without looking back. Mercy had never seen her again. There were others, Mercy said quietly. Women, children, they did not get balance. Gideon did not argue. He let the words sit. That silence said more than denial ever could, which is why this cannot stay unfinished, he replied. Loose ends rot. Elias laughed under his breath. You talk like a preacher now. I talk like a man who has seen what happens when the past is ignored. The wind picked up outside, rattling the shutters. The house groaned softly, as if it remembered storms worse than this. Mercy imagined the land listening, every acre soaked with stories it could not forget. A knock came at the door. Not loud, controlled, 3 slow taps. Elias stiffened. Mercy felt her heart jump. Gideon closed his eyes for a brief moment, then stood. Stay where you are, he said to Elias, not as a threat, but as instruction. He opened the door just enough for a sliver of moonlight to cut across the floor. A man stood there, broad-shouldered, his coat dark with dust. His face was hard and young in a way that spoke of borrowed confidence. His name, Mercy knew without being told, was Bram Locke. He had ridden with Gideon before. He carried orders well. Camp is set, Bram said quietly. Horses are watered. Men are restless. Gideon nodded. It will wait. Bram's eyes flicked past him, landing on Elias. Something unreadable crossed his face. For how long? As long as it takes, Gideon replied. Bram hesitated, then stepped back into the night. The door closed again, sealing the tension inside. Mercy let out a slow breath. You brought an audience, she said to Gideon. Yeah, I brought witnesses, Gideon corrected. What happens next should not vanish into rumor. Elias stepped closer to the table. You want a story, he said. You always did. I want the truth, Gideon answered. The truth, Elias replied, is rarely enough for men like you. Mercy moved between them, her voice firm. This ends badly if you keep circling each other. You know that. Gideon met her gaze. It already ended badly. I am simply refusing to let it stay that way. Elias turned away, walking toward the far wall where an old rifle hung unused. He did not touch it. He only looked at it as if weighing a lifetime against a single moment. Red Hollow was built on lies, he said. Promises the land could never keep. Men fought over scraps and called it destiny. Gideon followed his gaze, and you lit the match. Elias spun back, anger finally breaking through his calm. I tried to put the fire out. Mercy flinched at the heat in his voice. She had never heard Elias Crow raise it. The man before her looked less like the stubborn landowner and more like the younger figure from Whispered Stories. Gideon's voice stayed level. Then tell me how it started. Elia said nothing. The question hung between them, heavy and loaded. Mercy understood then that this was the true battleground. Not fists or weapons, but memory. Who controlled the story, controlled the outcome. Outside, the murmured voices shifted again. Laugh drifted across the field, sharp and careless. Someone was growing bored. That was dangerous. Mercy glanced toward the window. She caught sight of another figure near the fence, slimmer, moving with quiet purpose. Her breath caught. That walk was familiar. She knew it from a lifetime ago. Gideon, she said carefully. Who else is with you? Gideon frowned. No one you need concern yourself with. Mercy's eyes narrowed. That is not an answer. Before Gideon could respond, A shape detached from the darkness near the fence and moved closer to the house. Moonlight brushed her face just enough for Mercy to recognize her. The years had not softened that sharp gaze. The name surfaced like a wound reopening. Ruth Calder. Mercy's pulse thundered. If Ruth Calder was here, then this was no longer just Gideon Ash's reckoning. This was something far more personal, something that could not be controlled once it was unleashed. Inside the house, Elias felt the shift before he saw it. He turned toward the window, his face draining of color. "No," he whispered. Gideon followed his line of sight, surprise flashing across his features. For the first time that night, his certainty wavered. Outside, Ruth Calder stopped beneath the window, looking up at the house that had shaped the worst night of her life. Her presence pressed against the walls, against the men inside, against the fragile idea that this confrontation could still be contained. The wind fell silent again. The night leaned in. And Mercy understood that the past had finally brought all its witnesses to the door. Whether any of them were ready to speak or not, the night had grown heavier. Every shadow seemed alive, stretched and twisted by the flickering lamp. The presence of Ruth Calder outside the window pulled the air tight, as if the land itself held its breath. Elias Crow felt it in his chest, a tight knot of years of guilt and stubborn pride. He had lived through long days and longer nights, but none had carried this kind of weight. Not the fires, not the blood, not the silence that followed Red Hollow's fall. Gideon Ash stood rigid, watching Ruth without blinking. "She came," he said quietly, as if speaking to himself. "She came for the reckoning, just like everyone else." Mercy Hale stepped closer to Elias, her hand brushing his arm. "We cannot let this break us before we even face it," she said. Her voice was steady, but inside her pulse raced. She knew Ruth Calder. She had buried secrets with her, carried burdens no one else could understand. Ruth's arrival meant that the past would no longer negotiate quietly. Ruth remained still beneath the window, her face lit by moonlight. The years had sharpened her features, but the fire in her eyes had not dulled. "Elias," she called softly, her voice a mix of accusation and plea. "I have waited too long to let lies and silence hide the truth any longer." Elias's hands flexed into fists. He did not answer immediately. He had rehearsed countless responses over the years, but none felt right now. The ghosts of Red Hollow were more alive in that instant than ever. Mercy could see the tension pull at his shoulders, the old pride warring with fear. Gideon Ash broke the silence. "Everyone has a role tonight," he said. "The past has come to the doorstep, and we decide what walks through and what remains in shadow." Mercy glanced at him. His voice was calm, almost clinical, but she felt the undercurrent of danger. Gideon Ash never spoke without purpose. Every word, every pause, was a step toward, a conclusion only he could see. Elias finally spoke, his voice low, almost a growl. "Then let them come in." Ruth moved forward, stepping onto the porch. The floorboards groaned under her weight, echoing through the small house. Mercy caught her hand tighten on the edge of the window frame. There was no turning back. The moment had arrived, the culmination of years of unspoken truths, hidden pain, and unresolved debts. As Ruth entered, the shadows seemed to shift. Bromlock and the other men Gideon had brought flanked the doorway outside, unseen yet felt, waiting for signals, watching, ready. Their presence reminded everyone that the reckoning was not just personal. It carried the weight of history, of the land, of all the lives that had been touched, broken, or erased by Red Hollow's dark nights. Ilias's eyes met Ruth's, and in that instant, decades seemed to collapse. Every choice he had made, every step he had taken to escape the reach of the past, pressed into him like a physical weight. Ruth's gaze held him in place, unwavering, demanding acknowledgement. "Why now?" Ilias whispered, not sure if he was addressing Ruth or himself. "Because the land remembers," Ruth replied. "And the living must too." Her voice carried the authority of someone who had watched too much and waited too long. Mercy realized then that Ruth had not just come to confront Elias. She had come to demand the stories be told correctly, to make sure the truth survived even if it hurt. Gideon moved slightly, his hands resting on the back of a chair. "No one leaves tonight without facing the choices they made. That includes all of us." Mercy glanced at him sharply. She understood what he meant. He was not there to punish alone. He was there to ensure no one could hide. Not Elias, not Ruth, not herself. Everyone had to account for their part. The room seemed to shrink under the tension. Even the lamp flickered as if warning them all that the night was at its peak. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the shutters, carrying whispers across the fields that sounded almost like voices. Someone or something was moving closer. The men outside shifted, their boots quiet but deliberate. Ruth's eyes did not leave Elias. "Do you remember the river?" she asked softly. "Do you remember the night Red Hollow burned?" Elias swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Remember everything," he admitted. "Every mistake, every death, every silence that followed. You hid," Ruth said. "You thought if you buried yourself in this place, the past would not find you. But it does." Mercy felt the floor beneath her vibrate slightly. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it carried the promise of the unknown. Bramlock and the others were moving closer to the house now, unseen but felt, their presence a silent drumbeat of danger. Gideon leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "The night was never about one man's mistakes," he said. "It was about all of us. Every lie we told, every truth we ignored, led here. Tonight we face it together or not at all." Ilias's gaze flicked toward Mercy. "You knew this night would come," he said. "I hoped it would not," she replied, "but it is here. We cannot run from it." The tension in the room became almost unbearable. The shadows deepened, the wind whispered, and even the walls seemed to hold their breath. Every memory, every loss, every decision made decades ago, pressed down on the room like a storm about to break. Ruth stepped closer to Elias. Her hands were trembling slightly, but her voice was firm. "You do not have to face this alone. But you cannot face it with lies." Elias's jaw tightened. "I have lived long enough with them," he said. "I do not know if I can survive the truth." Gideon's gaze hardened. "Survival is not the point anymore. Accountability is. The night does not wait for hesitation." Outside, a sudden gust slammed the door shut with a deafening thud, startling everyone. Mercy's heart leaped. The men outside were closing in, drawn by the tension inside. The house seemed smaller, walls pressing closer, shadows stretched, twisting unnaturally. Ruth took a deep breath. "Then we face it," she said. Her voice carried the weight of history and the promise of confrontation. "All of it." Elias's eyes flicked to the window, then back at her. "All of it," he repeated. His voice was steadier now, but the tremor in his hands betrayed the storm inside. The lamplight trembled as if reacting to the rising tension. Outside, the wind carried another sound, faint but unmistakable, the distant clatter of horses' hooves. Bramlock and the others were positioning themselves, waiting for the right moment. Mercy's pulse hammered in her ears. The past had converged with the present, and the room was the center of the storm. Gideon stood, brushing his coat. "There is no turning back now. The night is ours to endure." Mercy moved closer to Elias. "Whatever comes," she said, "we face it together." Elias nodded, the weight of decades in his eyes. Ruth stepped forward, the air thick with unresolved tension. Every heart in the room beat faster. Every shadow seemed to lean closer. And then the wind fell silent. The house was still, almost impossibly so. Every person felt the weight of what was about to happen, the line between life and memory, truth and deception, pressed to a knife's edge. A faint creak came from the corner of the room, and everyone's gaze snapped to it. The moment hung, fragile and impossible, a single heartbeat before the storm finally struck. The stage was set. The past, the living, the truths buried in dust and silence all, converged in this small, lonely house. No one could look away. No one could hide. And outside, unseen eyes waited for the outcome that would shape the rest of their lives. Every second stretched into eternity as Elias, Ruth, Gideon, and Mercy faced the long shadow of history. Knowing the night had only just begun to reveal its final, inevitable truth, the silence broke with a single, deliberate step. Ruth Calder moved closer to the center of the room, her eyes steady on Elias Crow. The tension that had gripped the house for hours now began to shift. Slow and deliberate, like the first faint light of dawn brushing the horizon. Elias felt the weight in his chest ease slightly, the old burden of guilt loosening its grip. For the first time in decades, the truth could be spoken, and it would not destroy them all. "I never wanted Red Hollow to end the way it did," Elias said, his voice shaking but strong. I made mistakes, choices I thought were right at the time. I thought hiding would protect those who survived. I was wrong. His hands trembled, but he held them open, as if offering himself to the room, to history, to Ruth. Ruth's eyes softened, and for the first time that night she smiled faintly. I know, she said quietly. I have carried the same memories. I thought running, hiding, staying silent, that would protect me too, but it never did. Not really. Mercy Hale stepped forward, placing a hand on Elias's shoulder. It is over now, she said. All of us can finally breathe. The past doesn't control us anymore. Her eyes met Gideon Ash's across the room. He nodded once, his usual steel tempered by relief. It never did, he said. We just needed to remember that together. Outside, the wind softened. The horses shifted quietly in the field, sensing the change. Bramlock and the men had held their positions all night, but even they understood the moment had passed. No violence would come. It's only reflection, only acknowledgement. Elias let out a deep breath, almost as if the years of tension were leaving his body with the sound. He looked at Ruth, who now stood closer, her presence grounding him. I did not think we would survive this reckoning, he admitted. But seeing you here, knowing we can speak the truth, that changes everything. Ruth reached out her hand, and Elias took it without hesitation. There was forgiveness in that simple gesture, not for forgetting the past, but for finally accepting it. It was a bond made of shared history, pain, and endurance. Gideon Ash moved toward the table, resting a hand on the worn wood. Red Hollow might have been a place of shadows, he said, but it was also a place of people who endured. You all survived because you faced your truths. That is more than most can say. Mercy's lips curved into a small smile. We did not run from it, she said. Not anymore. She glanced at Elias and Ruth, then at Gideon, and that is what counts. Not the mistakes we made, but the courage to face them. The lamp flickered, then settled into a steady glow, bathing the room in a warm, golden light. Shadows softened against the walls, and the house seemed to breathe again, as if it had waited all these years for this moment of reconciliation. Elias pulled a chair over and sat, finally allowing himself to rest. The weight of decades had lifted just enough for him to feel the relief that had eluded him for so long. Ruth took the chair across from him, and their hands remained joined. Mercy stood beside the window, glancing outside at the quiet fields that had once carried so much fear. Gideon stood near the doorway, watchful but relaxed, knowing his part in the reckoning was complete. Do you think the others will understand? Elias asked, referring to those who had survived Red Hollow but had not been present tonight. They will, Ruth replied. We will tell the stories honestly. The truth has a way of reaching people, even if it takes time, and we are alive to share it. Gideon nodded. Red Hollow's story is not just about fire and loss. It is about endurance, about the choices we made, and the lives we rebuilt. That is the message worth remembering. Mercy let out a small laugh, the first genuine sound of joy in ours. And to think we spent so long fearing this night, she said. Outside, the first hints of dawn began to appear on the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. The wind carried a lighter, cleaner air, as if the land itself had been cleansed. Bramlock and the men slowly mounted their horses, ready to return to their duties, their roles in the story now concluded. Even the horses seemed calmer, their restless energy gone. Elias turned to Ruth, his expression one of quiet gratitude. Thank you for coming, he said simply. I thought no one would ever forgive me or even understand. Ruth shook her head. Understanding comes when we finally let go of the things we cannot change and hold on to what we can ourselves. Our choices, our willingness to live. You did that tonight. Gideon stepped toward the doorway, his voice carrying a rare softness. The past has a way of following us, but it cannot control us unless we let it. You faced it together, and that is enough to change everything that comes next. Mercy glanced at both of them, feeling a deep satisfaction in the resolution. The story of Red Hollow, once dark and unyielding, was no longer a chain. It had become a reminder of survival, courage, and the power of truth. Elias finally let himself relax, leaning back in his chair, the tension that had defined his life for decades slowly leaving him. Ruth squeezed his hand gently, a silent acknowledgement of shared pain and renewed hope. Mercy stepped closer, letting a small smile rest on her lips. Even Gideon Ash, whose presence had always been a warning, seemed lighter, freer. Outside, the sun rose fully, spilling light across the plains, the fields. The fence posts that had once seemed so lonely and foreboding. The shadows of the night retreated, replaced by warmth and promise. It was a new beginning, forged from honesty, courage, and the willingness to face the past. Elias spoke softly, almost to himself. "We can finally move forward." "Yes," Ruth agreed. "And this time, we carry the lessons, not the guilt." Gideon turned to leave, tipping his hat slightly. "Remember what brought you here tonight," he said. "Truth, courage, and standing together. That is the real legacy of Red Hollow." Mercy nodded, watching him disappear into the morning light. "It is more than enough," she said, her voice carrying across the quiet house. Elias and Ruth remained seated, their hands intertwined. The house, once heavy with shadow and fear, now felt alive with possibility. The past had been faced, the wrongs acknowledged, and the future stretched wide and unafraid. Mercy moved to the window one last time, looking out over the plains. The road ahead was clear, the horizon bright, and for the first time in years the land felt like it belonged to those who had endured it. She turned back to Elias and Ruth, a deep satisfaction warming her chest. "Red Hollow is ours now," she said. "It's not because of what it took from us, but because of what we survived and how we survived it." Elias smiled, the lines of years softened by relief. "Then let's make sure the story's told right." Ruth nodded, her eyes glinting with hope and resolve. "And let's make sure we live it better this time." The lamp flickered once more, as if agreeing, and then settled in steady light. Outside, the wind carried a gentle warmth. Birds began their morning calls, and the long night was finally over. The past had been faced, the present was embraced, and the future waited, wide open and full of promise. In that quiet house, on that lonely stretch of land, the story of Elias Crow, Ruth Calder, Mercy Hale, and even Gideon Ash reached its conclusion, not in revenge, it's not in fear, but in truth, courage, and the hope that even the darkest history can lead to a new beginning. And for the first time, Red Hollow felt like home again,